Welcome to the new Vision Mobile webinar. I'm Matos, the Developer Economics Senior Program Manager, and I'll be introducing and moderating today's webinar. We'll present the key findings from our latest Q4 2015 developer survey, which reached nearly 22,000 mobile IoT desktop and cloud developers. The key insights are available as a free report, which is called the State of the Developer Nation report. And we'll send you a link in case you haven't downloaded it yet. A brief intro to Vision Mobile before we start. We are a leading analyst company in the developer economy, reaching and engaging thousands of developers through our Developer Economics Research Program. Our research tracks the latest developer trends and helps clients like Amazon, Twitter, IBM predict where the market is headed next. Bill Ray, Senior Business Analyst at Vision Mobile and author of the State of Nation report, is presenting today's webinar. Bill has been involved in the mobile and IoT industry for a long time and has extensive experience in the field. The presentation today is going to run for around 30 minutes, and then we'll have a brief Q&A session with questions from you. So be sure to stick around until the end. Please don't speak your questions out loud, but write them on the chat window of the control panel. We'll address as many as we can during the webinar, and we'll reply to the rest via email. We'll be recording today's webinar and be sending you a copy of this recording. So let's get started. Bill, take it away.
Good afternoon. Hopefully everyone can hear me. I've just changed microphones, so hopefully you can all hear me okay. Do let us know if not.
Yes,
okay, we're going to talk about the State of the Nation, Total Developer Nation. As Matos says, that was it was done in Q4 2015. Of course, its publication date is Q1 2016, based on our largest developer survey. So that's our front page. Basically, we do these surveys every 6 months. We send it out to loads and loads of developers all over the world to find out what they're doing, what languages they use, and all that sort of stuff. We collect all this data together into this huge database, and then we draw out particular insights based on, comparing data from different sizes and so forth. The State of the Nation report, which is the one I'm going to talk about today, is our sort of generic, just a look at how things are going, a sort of 50,000-foot view of the developer economy. And then we have individual reports that drill down into that. So it's based on a survey of 21,000 plus developers. It was very nearly 22,000. I think we had 21,940 or 960. It was really close to 22,000 this time. Obviously, it's a very big undertaking, these surveys. That contact lots of people. We have lots of partners who help us with that. And we collect all that data. As Matos said, it's available free from that URL on the screen, though we will send out a link to you if you've not already downloaded it, in exchange for an email address in the usual way. So that's where we get the data from. In addition to this State of the Nation, which we give away free, and this presentation, we also obviously do our detailed research, primary research, in lots of particular areas. We do a data board surface where people can actually get hold of the information themselves. We have an interface that you can use to create your own charts and pull up your own particular analysis. And of course, we do premium reports based on particular areas like IoT or just focusing on desktop development and so forth. I may mention one or two of those as we go through the data. I'll try not to too much, but do be aware that they are available. Like I said, we don't do this one on its own. Oh, I should mention, yes, Matos kindly credited me as the author of this report. I did author a lot of it, but it was done with 2 of my colleagues as well. There were at least 3 of us who worked on this report. And it was very interesting. Getting the data required a whole bundle of people. Google, Intel, Microsoft, Ubuntu, and all sorts of other community partners and media partners, reaching out to 21 or 22,000 developers all over the world is an enormous undertaking, and we asked them to answer quite a lot of questions, and it requires a lot of help. So all these companies were very helpful in achieving that. So enough with the advertising, let's get on with the data, shall we? Okay, oh, there we go. So first thing to say is that the way to the desktop is through the browser. Oops, sorry, weird thing happened there. Okay, the way to the desktop is through the browser. We asked developers, particularly desktop developers in this instance, what their primary targeted platform was, where they aimed their software. And 44% said that they're targeting the browser. That's where their applications are eventually executing. It's the most popular place to be, almost half of all professional developers. After that comes Windows in its variety of forms. 39% of desktop professionals are targeting Windows. OS X is still a minority sport. That's Apple's platform, is still, despite the success of some of the MacBooks, is a minority thing. If we look at this chart, I'm going to focus in now just on the desktop part of it there. You can see the desktop developers there. So 50% of professional developers are targeting the desktop. So mobile and IoT tends to get all the attention. That's where the cool kids hang out. But it's important not to forget that desktop is still a very important part of the market. In fact, it's the largest part of the developer market. More developers are targeting the desktop than anything else. And at the bottom there, we can see the web browser taking 44%, Windows 39%, OS X, like I said, 4%. Linux, and these are professional developments, I should point out. This isn't just people playing around. So 9% of professional developers, 9% of developers who are targeting the desktop have Linux as their primary platform. So there is money being made there. There are professional developers creating applications for Linux, or Linux, if you will, and a few other platforms knocking in there. If we broaden this out a bit, I think you can see how that compares across the other areas. We can see on the left there the mobile apps. You can see Android and iOS competing as ever, 39%, 41%, obviously the two hugely dominant platforms. We don't see the mobile browser having anything like the traction of the web browser, the desktop browser. 9% of applications being targeted at the mobile browser. And you know, mobile browsers, while they are becoming more capable, they don't have the performance and they don't have all the features. We also see that mobile applications often want to take advantage of features such as electronic compass or orientation features, which aren't available within the browser. Well, they've tried to be, but location now is, and some other features are coming in. Windows Mobile obviously declining, and the others, you know, your Blackberries and your Sailfishes and so forth, are down at 3%. If we go to the right-hand side and we look at cloud and back-end services, there we've got the top hosts. Interesting that Amazon, of course, is the largest provider of web service hosting, without a shadow of a doubt. Commercially, they're much larger than everyone else. You can see Azure is only 12%. But if you look at the left-hand side of that circle, you'll see self-hosted is still 42%. So the majority of cloud developers are still hosting their own clouds. If we look at the Internet of Things, that's the one in from the left. It's a slightly different chart because we didn't think it was useful to break that down by the platform being used. Instead, we've broken it down by the kind of application they're developing. IoT still has a very large number of platforms. Originally, we did produce this chart with all the different platforms, and there are just hundreds of them in it, and it was just a bit of a mess. So rather than do that, we're looking at here at the kind of applications they're creating, and we have people mashing up data, creating third-party apps, and creating new devices. So we can see what the professional Internet of Things developers are doing, of which it is the smallest portion. So that's what professional developers are doing with their time, and the target is that their targets platforms. If we look at those developers and we look at their experience, one of the things we can see, which is perhaps surprising, is that every year the level of developer experience drops. And we found that to be true. Oh, I've gone one too many there. Excuse me for that. We found that to be true for a while. The reason, of course, isn't that developers are actually becoming less experienced. What's happening is that new developers are joining the workforce, and that's happening with increasing speed. The overall number of developers in the world is growing up quite quickly. Obviously, the majority of those developers are coming in are inexperienced and joining the bottom of the workforce. The percentage of developers with more than 6 years of software experience has dropped across all sectors. But if we look at mobile as an example, we'll see this on the charts in a minute. It's 8% it's dropped. Whereas a percentage of developers with less than a year's experience has risen across the sectors. Again, 3% for mobile. So if we actually go and look at that chart, it's a bit clearer. mobile, well, top left, we've got desktop, which is quite typical. Very similar to mobile there. You can see that the number of developers with more than 6 years experience has dropped from 43 to 40%. The one with less than a year has increased considerably up to 17%. And we see that across all sectors. We see the number of developers. I should explain, this experience is overall software experience, not experience in that particular area. There are not many IoT developers with more than 6 years experience of IoT, but this is overall software experience. The green being this period, the red being 1 year ago. So we see that the overall level of experience has dropped and the number of inexperienced developers has grown. And of course that has an implication. One of the things we'll see later when we look at the languages that people are choosing to use, we see that a lot of the high-level languages are gaining in popularity because they're quicker to learn. And as companies try to attract developers and try to recruit, enlarge the size of the developer community, they're going to have to be aware that there's no point in appealing to developers, experienced developers. They really need to be appealing to this lower demographic, newer demographic of inexperienced developers who are coming into the market. And that's going to continue, obviously. So that's the overall experience level across the 4 sectors of desktop, cloud, mobile, and IoT. Like I said, it's very recognizable and very similar across all 4 sectors. We're going to break it down now in the bottom half of that chart by developer segments. I'm just going to take a moment to introduce those segments to you. One of the things that we do at Vision Mobile, and apologies if some of you have heard this before, but we break down developers rather than looking at the platforms they target or the applications they develop. We look at the motivation for developing those applications. So at the top there in the green, we have the self-improvers, the hobbyists or moonlighters who are just building applications to have fun. They have no interest in making money, they're just having a laugh. We've got explorers who are gaining experience or doing it as a side project. And they're not making money yet, but they have the intention that they're doing so for a good reason. And they intend to make money out of it someday. Then we have the ones who are actually looking to make money. We've got the hunters who are building an app business and focused on making money. And then we've got the guns for hire. Obviously, contractors have been a huge part of the IT industry for many, many years. And we call them guns for hire. We then got down the bottom extending a business. We've got the product extenders, people who are creating apps onto mobile. We've got mobile startups, the gold seekers. We said mobile startups there, but interestingly, actually, we're seeing them on desktop as well. And these are people who are looking to be the next Flappy Bird or Clash of Clans, hoping to make a great deal of money. Digital product publishers on the bottom left, and of course, enterprise IT, which is an extremely important market on the right. So if we look at how those segments break down across desktop, cloud, and mobile, we can see that in cloud, the middle line there, we have the smallest numbers of hobbyists and explorers. Now, remember that hobbyists and explorers are the ones who aren't trying to make money. They are the ones who are just looking at it. And we can see that the largest proportion of that group is in desktop. And the reason for that is that desktop has the lowest barrier to entry. Anyone interested in creating software will have a desktop computer, pretty much. And the barriers to entry are extremely low these days. The development kits are free to download. Creating desktop software is very simple. Just behind them in those first 2 demographics, or first 2 segments, we've got the mobile. Again, a lot of people exploring, seeing what they can do. If we slide over to the right-hand side of that chart, you can see that the cloud has the largest number of enterprise IT developers, which again is not hugely surprising. The barriers to entry for cloud are relatively high, and people are very interested in doing it. Businesses are very interested to take advantage of the opportunities. Mobile, we have a relatively small number of enterprise IT workers, 7% on the bottom right there. Interesting from our point of view, and a change, it's a small one, but if you look at the gold seekers, that purple block, these are people who are starting up a new company, trying to make some VC money. And we see that on mobile, we have 3%, which is slightly down over the last year. But in desktop, we see it again at 3%, but that's actually up from I think 1.5% the previous year. So we can see an increase in interest in from desktop from those gold seekers. And it's a relatively small number of people, but it's interesting to see that the desktop is getting interesting again. And of course, part of that is down to Windows 10, the potential of that platform and the new opportunities it presents, and the new form factors we're seeing as desktop and tablet are becoming increasingly merging into a single product category. So there we have the breakdown there. Now, we talked about people working in different areas. Actually, we talked about people working in mobile and fixed and mobile, desktop, cloud. What's interesting, of course, and we talked about hobbyists and professionals and so forth, it's perfectly possible for a developer to be a professional desktop developer while being a hobbyist mobile developer, or indeed a hobbyist mobile developer while being a professional cloud developer and so forth. Software engineers don't tend to stay in the little boxes. They do tend to move around and do different things. We also see professional developers who work in one area being professional on desktop and professional on mobile and so forth. And we thought it'd be interesting to look at how much that overlap happens and how many developers are actually doing that. And if we take just the professionals, we can see very quickly that a third of them keep to a single sector. 34% of professional developers work only within one sector. 7% of professionals are professional developers across desktop, mobile, IoT, and cloud computing. 36% professionally across 2 of the 4 sectors. And we see that it's not an easy thing to represent graphically, and hopefully I have some sort of sense of this for you. If you look at this chart with its attractive octopus, you can see the boxes there for desktop, mobile, cloud, and IoT. You can see the yellow box is the professional involvement and the blue is the total. And of course, IoT has the smallest number of professionals involved in it, while desktop has the 65% of professionals involved. Now, what we're interested in here particularly is those arrows going between the groups. And if you look at, for example, the cloud and desktop, you can see quite thick arrows going across. We can see that 72% of cloud developers are also involved in desktop. We can see 65% of desktop developers are also involved in cloud. So we can see there's a significant overlap between those groups. If we look down the bottom at IoT, we can see that 60% of IoT developers are also involved in desktop. 53% of IoT developers are also involved in mobile. 61% are also involved in cloud. So we see that, I mean, we know that IoT development is not something that is making a great deal of money. And so we know that they're not making a great deal of money, so the people have to be involved in other areas as well. And IoT at the moment is still very much a growth field. So we can see something of the overlap between those fields there. If we look at the bottom right, the number of development areas that professionals are involved in, I mentioned this on the last slide, we can see that 7% are involved in all 4 sectors. But on the left-hand side, 34%, a third are only involved in one area. So the vast majority of developers, software developers, are involved in more than one sector. The individual areas here, the ones working in individuals, are in a minority. So that's the areas they work in. Like I said, there's a lot more detail in the report. I hope you have a chance to look at it, and it provides a lot more analysis of this. But this is just, like I said, a high-level view of what's going on. If we look at languages they're using, we can see that Java is declining in mobile, which is interesting in itself, but on the cloud it is rising. We think about why Java is declining, well, it's quite a sharp decline. We can see it's because the rise in cross-platform toolkits, greater use of JavaScript and its derivatives, and more programming options available. Java is, of course, the default programming language for Android. In theory, we're supposed to call it something else, but everyone calls it Java. It's a long time ago, it was more or less the only language you could program Android in. Nowadays, there are many languages available. And that is even more true when it comes to the iPhone and iOS applications. There was a time when Objective-C was mandated. There's this marvelous quote from Steve Jobs saying that he would not accept programs that were written in any language other than Objective-C. But now it's in sharp decline. Again, cross-platform scripts have become very standardized for creating iOS applications. And of course, Apple has launched Swift, its own programming language. So Objective-C is really under assault from both sides. And on the cloud, we see Python and C# taking a share. Let's have a look at that in more detail. I think we can do that. Yeah, so I've just put a cover over the cloud side for a moment. If we look at the languages used by mobile developers, we can see HTML5. A lot of discussion in the office as to whether HTML5 is a language, and that's a long debate. We've written several blogs on that subject, and there's been some very interesting comments on that. But within this context, developers are using it to create user interfaces and so forth. We have JavaScript there, or XXX script, because we have TypeScript, CoffeeScript, and so forth, which are all JavaScript at their heart. And we can see that's increasing. These bars, by the way, the deeper color at the bottom part of the bar, that says their primary language. So, you know, 12% of script programmers now say it's their primary language, and 63% say they are also using that language. Java, as I said, in decline from 65 to 57% using Java. C++, relatively static. C#, relatively static, and that's very interesting because until relatively recently, C#, of course, is Microsoft's language and was tied to the success of the Windows platform. Of course, that ceased to be true with Xamarin, the cross-platform compiler, which would take C# and compile it down for other platforms. And of course, Microsoft's now acquired that company, and we've seen a huge success with that. And that's keeping C# as a viable language, despite the fact that the platform, the mobile platform on which it runs, really holds a very, very small market share and doesn't show any sign of changing. Objective-C I already mentioned, dropping down. I wanted to mention Visual Tools. Sorry, Swift on the right there, rising gradually. I think Apple's having success with that. I want to mention Visual Tools. As you can see, they've increased a little as a primary tool and a little more as a total mindshare. And it's interesting, those tools, you know, a few years ago again were really not considered very powerful, but these days these sort of drag and drop application creation tools, but they are becoming increasingly popular. And what's interesting is they're the only category of language, the only language which has actually become more popular across cloud as well. If you look on the right hand side, you can see the cloud and their visual tool growing considerably. So it's a language which is growing on both sides, just the same pattern. And I think we'll see as the experience of developers drops, we will see a rise in the use of visual tools. But on the cloud, going back to the side of the cloud, we do see Java increasing as a popular language, PHP increasing. In fact, all these languages are increasing, as you can see on this chart. Every language is on the rise, which does beg the question, where are these developers coming from? And of course, the answer is twofold. On the one hand, we're seeing developers using more languages. So we see big increases in the also using as developers realize that they have to know 2 or 3 languages in order to compete in the marketplace. But also what's not shown here is the drop in the niche languages, things like Lua and F#, which a few years ago were more popular. And on this chart, we've only got the most popular languages. We've dropped the others off. But if they were there, you would see that this rise in these popular languages has been at the cost of those niche languages. And I think we're seeing the cloud market becoming more, I was going to say coagulating, I'm not sure that's a great word, but coalescing, perhaps that's better, coalescing around the languages like Java, PHP, and of course the scripting languages, which will, I think, become increasingly popular. So yeah, we look at both sides of that, and hopefully you can see the trends there. So this is what the developers are doing. So the question now becomes, how are they making money? Now, only the first bullet point's gray here because I'm going to deal with these one at a time. So cloud developers are most likely to make money. We asked developers, we don't ask them how much they make personally. We're not interested in their wages. We ask how much revenue the company they work for is bringing in. Now, of course, that will vary quite widely. but and we'll talk about that. But it gives us trends. So companies who are making more than $25,000 a month in cloud revenue, if we break them down, actually, let's do it on the following chart. Let's do that. Here we go. So top line there, cloud revenue. You can see 27% are earning less than $100 a month, 10% are earning less than $500 a month, and we've got this thing called the poverty line, which you put in there. We say that's a sustainable business. If you're earning less than $500 a month, you're not a business. You're barely paying for the beer. $500 to $5,000 a month, 19%, and then up to 25%. 25k, you got 12%, and on the right hand side there we have 32% who are earning over 25,000. And if we break those down by the platform they're using, Amazon, Azure, Google, DigitalOcean, Heroku, and IBM, those proportions actually match the market share of those companies. So we can't say, you know, that if you want to make money you should be using a particular cloud host. Doesn't seem particularly important, but we can say that if you want to make money as a company, cloud computing is the place to be. Of course, these figures are slightly skewed, and I should mention that, because companies developing cloud solutions are generally larger. You go IoT, and we'll see that in a moment. IoT and mobile is often developments done by a very large number of small companies, whereas here what we have is a smaller number of large companies. So inevitably there is an increase, a weighting towards the higher revenue. So that's cloud, which, like I said, is the place to be. If we go back to the previous slide and highlight a different bit, we can see mobile developers earning more than 25k for their companies are most likely to be targeting iOS. Now, this is a more interesting figure. If we go back to the chart, and you can see I've highlighted a different part of it now. We've got the mobile line, and you can see only 18% of mobile developers are bringing in more than $25,000 a month. But if we break that down, we can see that iOS is much higher than Android. And that's interesting because the market share of Android is certainly, well, it becomes a question. If we look at sales of Android devices, we can see very quickly that Android outsells iOS. There are more Android devices being sold every day than there are iOS devices by a considerable margin. Now, some will argue, and we've been debating this, that iOS devices have a longer shelf life, a longer usable life. Now, if we actually look at the number of devices in use, the figures are much closer. And we don't have exact figures for that, but we do have some figures for number of devices in use. And we can see that sales is not necessarily a good guide, because a lot of people are buying Android devices and discarding them very quickly, whereas iOS devices tend to have a slightly longer life. But even that gives us an equivalence, an equal number. It doesn't give us this iOS having a larger share of the market. So we have to go further, and we have to think about the demographic that owns these devices and the kind of applications they're buying. And the fact is that if you buy, I think you can buy an Android phone now for, I'm in the UK, so I can buy an Android phone without a subsidy, without being locked to a network for £35. Tesco's, the supermarket chain, is now selling Android phones for £35. So if I've paid £35 for an Android phone, I am not going to be paying £5 for a copy of Minecraft, which I think is what it costs at the moment. So it's a different demographic, whereas the cheapest iOS phone is, what, £350? So I'm a different kind of person, and I'm more prepared to spend money. Not only that, but I'm more interesting to advertisers. Again, the kind of person who's spending £35 on an Android phone isn't of great interest to advertisers, whereas iOS customers are. So that's where we see the difference. So the reason we have the numbers there is partly because the demographic that owns iPhones will spend more money than the demographic that owns Android phones, but also that we must be careful not to look at sales figures as an indication of market share. We have to be a little bit careful of that. The last bullet point on that previous slide, we can see that the desktop developers, the money is coming from the browser, the applications running in the browser. And we saw before that the browser is definitely the most popular target platform for desktop. If we look at that, Windows is a close second. I don't know if you remember earlier, but 44% of desktop developers, professional desktop developers, are targeting the browser. We can see that above 25k, 42% of those are targeting the browser and making a great deal of money from it. Targeting the browser, of course, has huge advantages in cross-platform nature of it. Browser performance is really very good these days, and the advantages of a native application have been much reduced than they used to be. It's sort of interesting because this is what Netscape, if anyone remembers Netscape from a very long time ago, they always said the browser is the platform and that the future would all be browsers and we'd all be using web browsers for everything. And it seems like it's actually happening. A little too late for Netscape, who are long gone, but there you go. Mac, 7% there. If you remember, 4% of desktop developers are targeting the Mac. So it does seem that it's slightly overrepresented in the higher portion. And Linux, well, Linux is there, which is very interesting because development for Linux is often considered to be a hobbyist activity. But in fact, there are a lot of professional applications, serving applications, data crunching applications, and so forth, which are sold for a great deal of money, which do run on Linux. And that brings up the revenue for those companies. And therefore, it is overrepresented in this category. So targeting Linux isn't necessarily a bad thing to do. So that's the chart showing all 4 revenues. Like I said, all these charts are in the State of the Nation reports, so do take a look. There's a lot more analysis looking at all these figures and everything. I've skipped over IoT in this one because we have a much more detailed breakdown of IoT, and we have a specialist who looks at this, and we all look at this. It's a very interesting field, and there's a great deal happening. One of the most interesting trends we've seen from our previous report is that those who want to make money or are making money from Internet of Things are doing so by exploiting a variety of revenue models. They are not focusing on a single revenue model. In fact, we see the average, if you take successful developers, you see an average of 2.5 revenue models. So they're not just using advertising, they're not just selling downloads, they're using a variety of things. And in fact, we see the most widely used revenue models have dropped in popularity but that's really because we've had a lot of zero earners. There's a lot of people in the last 6 months and year who've joined the IoT industry who have yet to earn any money at all. E-commerce is increasing, and selling services to developers has also doubled in popularity. So there's now a considerable market industry of companies who are providing tools, both hardware and software, to IoT developers to enable them to rapidly prototype ideas, to create new things, and so forth. And that's now becoming a sustainable business model, and we can see it's doubled over the last year from 5% to 11%. Now, if we look at some of the layout of that, I've got to go quite swiftly because I think we're running out of time, but we look at the average revenue generated by IoT developers. The red there is Q1 2016, the blue is Q2 2015. So as you can see, the number of developers who are on zero has risen considerably, while the number of developers who are earning 1 to 5K has dropped, and the other two have remained pretty static. So what we're seeing, as I said, is that new people joining the industry, bringing down the average for everyone. We move across to the number of revenue models. I mentioned earlier that people are using more revenue models, and you can see that if you want to earn, the red line there is the figures from this survey, the blue line from our previous survey, and it shows the number of revenue models on the left. And like I said, it's now 2.5 revenue models for people earning over 50K. And it does seem that the more revenue models you have, the more money you earn. So there's a real incentive to not just think, you know, how do you make money? We use advertising. No, it's advertising and sales and licensing and everything else you can think of. Thinking of everything else you can think of, you can see the popularity of this is over last year. Selling services to developers, agreed, I said that's increased in popularity considerably. Indirectly through brand awareness has increased, e-commerce, but dropping contract, advertising, selling physical products are all slightly down. These are fairly small percentages, but they are significant changes. And then we have this chart here. Now what's interesting here is that we have the revenue, we have the business models as dots on this chart. And across the bottom, we have the percentage of revenue, a percentage of developers who are earning good revenue who are using that model. So as you move towards the right, these are successful business models. These are business models that work, that are bringing in decent revenue. If we move up the chart on the vertical axis, we can see the percentage of who are using that model. So what we have in the top right, we have software licensing, contract work, selling physical products. Now these are established models that work, that bring in revenue, fine. On the left, we have overviews, we have advertising, which lots of people are doing, but doesn't bring in any money. And we see this, I should mention, across all the sectors. Advertising is constantly thought of as the great way of making money and very rarely does. What we're really interested in, though, is the bottom right section. Now here we have revenue models which are bringing in good revenue, but not being widely used. And we think these are the emerging models. So you can see the affiliate programs, the selling service developers, as I mentioned, the per device connection, user royalties, these ways of making money, which are doing very well for those who are using them, but only being used by a very small number of developers. And we'd expect to see those emerging and moving up the chart as people start to realize that that's a good way of making money. So, like I said, we had to move quite swiftly through that, but that's the whole chart. Do download the report, which has a much more detailed analysis of that chart. We're going to have some questions now. So, but if you do want to contact us afterwards, that's my email address and our Director of Research and Operations, Christina. So that's the end of the charts that I have and the insights. I wonder if we have any questions.
Thanks, Bill. We have a couple of clarifying comments, if you will. So in the segmentation part, Laura says that the enterprise IT segment mentions CIOs and IT managers. So where are the individual enterprise developers?
Okay, they would also be there. I think that's a mistake on the, I'm going to try to go back to that. Thinking here, yes, it says CIOs and IT managers using apps to increase organizational efficiency and reduce costs. No, enterprise IT would also be enterprise developers. If they are asked to self-identify as to which area they go to, and they would be enterprise.
Thanks, Bill. And there's a comment about Objective-C. I think that's a matter of phrasing it. Objective-C not being under assault by Swift, as they're both by Apple, and Swift has been introduced as a replacement for Objective-C. I don't know if you have any specific.
Yeah, I mean, I still say it's under assault because as a language, you know, yes, Apple is replacing Objective-C with Swift. So yes, Objective-C will disappear. No, it's not. It's a commercial decision by Apple to do that. And you know, Swift is a very fine language, and we've talked before about how rapid the rise has been. We've also in a previous study, A State of the Nation, we looked at where Swift developers were coming from, and what was interesting there was that we saw a large portion, certainly early on in the development of Swift, a large portion of those starting to use Swift were not Objective-C programmers. So what Apple appeared to have done by the introduction of Swift is bring in a new generation of programmers who were not using Objective-C previously, and that was very interesting. Now, yeah, Objective-C, I think it's under assault, but as you say, it's not a competition between companies. This is an internal thing. And I think it is also under assault from the cross-scripting languages, which are becoming very popular.
Thanks, Bill. While we're waiting for more questions, I have one of my own. So there's a lot of feedback that we're getting and interest in Chrome OS. So is interest in Chrome OS actually increasing?
Chrome OS, of course, is I was going to go back to the slide with that on, is Google's, it's not Android, it's a browser-based interface for Chromebooks, for very low-power devices. And what we see, and you see on this chart here, we see 2% of professional developers targeting Chrome OS. Now that figure hasn't increased for the last year. The last two surveys, it's been static at 2%. So what we have is developers, we have a group of developers who are doing things on it. It's starting to be used in some schools, and particularly in countries where computing power is still relatively expensive, they can reservice old computers with Chrome OS, and there are a couple of companies doing that now. So I wouldn't say it's increasing, but it's certainly persistent.
Thanks, Bill. There's a good question about methodology, so I think this is a good chance to address it. Ben asks if there were any survey biases, and if there were, how do we treat those? I can help out with that one, Bill, but I think...
Yeah, no, you make a start and I'll pitch in if I need to.
Okay, I think the scale of the survey really helps. So having nearly 22,000 respondents is a sure way of having a large enough sample in order to have a representative sample of the entire community. And we do three sorts of weighting in order to remove biases. So removing biases by platform, by region, and as well as by segment. Bill, do you want to have a few more words here?
Yeah, I mean, we do have to take care. One of the things we have to be careful of is we slightly overrepresent hobbyists because they tend to answer our survey. It's quite an in-depth survey, and we have to allow for that and be aware of it. And of course, in our analysis, beyond the sort of facts and figures, we make sure that we mention that. And again, that's why it's important to take a look at the State of the Nation report and do read it and take an interest, because it's well worth it.
So yeah, I think this was a good opportunity to discuss methodology. I don't see any more questions, so I'll ask one of my own that I've been thinking about during the presentation. So Bill, our data shows that there's an increase in the number of developers who work across many different sectors. So is that the way of the future, or do they need to work across the four segments that we're looking into, so mobile, desktop, cloud, and IoT?
We do see that, and we do see, again, I'll try and get to that slide, we do see that increasing as the developers do encompass more sectors. So yeah, I think there's two things here. Firstly, we will see developers having to work across them, but also we're seeing the sectors themselves combine. The difference between desktop and mobile is becoming very hard to justify. We look at Windows 10, and we look at the Surface tablets, and we look at the Android tablets, which, the line between a desktop and a tablet and a mobile device is becoming very difficult to determine. And software developers are increasingly not bothered. They'll just create an application that'll run on anything. With IoT, it's a bit different because there are embedded devices, but that will change. We now see increasingly JavaScript being used, so the same code is being used across all four platforms. So it's not just that developers are having to learn new skills to work across all four platforms, it's the fact that the languages and tools available are working across all four sectors, and therefore it's easy for them to do so.
Okay, so we're getting some more questions. Okay, interesting one. If I'm reading it correctly, is if the new developers coming in are impacting technology choices.
Yes, I think they are, absolutely. And I think that's why we see the increase in visual tool development and why the increase in JavaScript. I mean, I'm a little biased. I've written a couple of programs on Java development myself. Sorry, written a couple of books on Java development, and I'm a big fan of Java, but I was a C programmer for many years, so I tend to view these modern languages with a certain amount of cynicism, but the power of JavaScript and Python is really unmatched, and we are seeing those languages increase at quite a rate. So yes, I think as the amount of experience that developers have on average increases.
The question is, Ben clarified about, I think, the actual age of the developers. I don't know if you have any insight on the ages. I can't remember, to be honest.
We didn't ask their age in this report. In this survey, we didn't ask their age. We did ask it in the last report, our previous State of the Nation, and yeah, developers are very young. I mean, we know it's a male-dominated industry. We know that it's a young person-dominated industry. We saw that particularly in the emerging nations in Africa and East Asia, where the average age was extremely young. So yeah, definitely, the average age of a software developer is getting younger.
Thanks, Bill.
But I think that's probably a good thing.
Yeah. Scott is asking for a clarification. So in one of the early slides, there's a statement that only 8% of developers have more than 6 years of experience. Then there's another slide where we say that around 40% have over 6 years of experience. Can you help clarify here?
I think this is the slide you're thinking of. The percentage of developers more than 6 years has dropped across sectors. It's dropped by 8%. That's a drop of 8%, not 8%.
Yeah.
So yes, I can clarify that. And in fact, if we look at that, we can see it's gone down from 48% to 40% in mobile. So apologies, that's probably not worded terribly well.
Great, thanks, Bill. So I don't see any more questions. So feel free, please, everyone, to drop us an email after the webinar. You can reach Bill at Vision Mobile and myself at Matos at Vision Mobile. Before you go, we'd like to ask you to give us some feedback. So help us improve. Take just a couple of minutes to answer a few questions on how you found this webinar, and to give us some feedback on how we can improve it. So thanks for attending, everyone, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much. Bye.